Hello, it's Amelia from Jazz Consulting discussing Kathmandu, who operate within the outdoor clothing and equipment retail sector, and their potential expansion into Canada. Firstly, the demographic differences between Canada and New Zealand. Canada has a population of 30 million people, around 8 times the population of New Zealand, with 90% of their population living within 100 miles of the Canada-US border. Canada also has 37 times the landmass of New Zealand. Looking at the political influences on Canada, both Canada and New Zealand operate in a democratic society. Another similarity between the countries are the low levels of corruption. Having a democratic government and low levels of corruption make Canada a more appealing option to expand into, as it's considered lower risk than a dictatorship government or somewhere with higher corruption. Canada has free trade agreements with many countries such as North America, South Korea, and some European countries, as well as negotiations with India and Japan, among others. However, New Zealand is not one of them, which means that Kathmandu will be affected by the import tariffs unless some manufacturing of the products is moved to Canada. Now, looking at economic factors influencing the expansion into Canada, like New Zealand, Canada has one of the most stable economies in the world. This is important when looking to invest into a host country, to know that your investment is lower risk than countries with unstable economies. Although Canada's house prices are rising faster than income, that means people are struggling to pay for houses, but not to the same extent as New Zealand. But maybe an indication that individuals may not have the disposable income to spend on branded outdoor clothing. Technological factors can also play a large part in deciding if a country is right for a company. Technology is Canada's fastest growing sector, which is a great opportunity for Kathmandu to recruit high-level specialists, especially when working and developing the websites. However, for consumers in Canada to get practical internet speeds, they need to live in highly populated cities such as Toronto and the British Columbia, which are again located close to the US border. The theme of being located near to the US border, along with the vast majority of the population, is important information for Kathmandu if they choose to open physical stores in Canada. Kathmandu and New Zealand are known for their community-based initiatives. If they choose to operate in Canada, they could improve the infrastructure to support technology in more remote areas, which will be widely appreciated. Looking at the social cultural influences on the macro environment, both New Zealand and Canada have diverse subcultures, with New Zealand's population being made up by mostly New Zealand Europeans, followed by Maori. Canada is made up of diverse ethnicities but can also be looked at through language. Around 20% of the population speaks French as their first language, and around 56% speak English as their first. I used Hofstede's model to compare the typical cultures of both New Zealand and Canada to identify the similarities and major differences. As you can see from the graph, most of Hofstede's cultural dimensions are very similar, with only a few points difference between the two countries for each dimension. The largest difference is the power distance dimension, which showed Canada scored 17 points higher than New Zealand, which suggests that Canada values hierarchical structures somewhat more than New Zealanders, but both scores are considered low. Both cultures are highly individualistic, meaning that their achievements are individual rather than societal, and people look out for themselves and their immediate family. Both cultures are seen as moderately masculine, which means they can be relatively assertive but also have feminine qualities, such as seeking a healthy work-life balance. The uncertainty avoidance scores for both countries means that they accept change willingly. Long-term orientation shows that both countries are looking for fast results and relatively don't invest into their future as countries with higher scores. Both indulgence scores are high and means that these countries typically enjoy having leisure time and act and spend money as they please, which means that Canadians are more likely to spend more on branded items than countries that scored lower. Overall, culturally, New Zealand and Canada are very similar. However, Kathmandu should prepare and acknowledge that there will be slight cultural differences and that the finding of hosties are not exhaustive. Managers should not assume that because the countries have similar ratings that they act in the same way and have the same traditions and values. If Kathmandu was to expand into Canada, they should consider hiring Canadians in senior roles so that they can educate other employees about advertising strategies and objectives that will work in Canada. The formal institutions that Kathmandu would need to remember is that, like New Zealand, Canada also operates under common law. Both have signed the Human Rights Act, however the local laws and law on employment are going to be different. Some informal institutions of Canada are the cultural traditions, with a variety of them coming from Europe, mostly France, the US, and some of Canada's own traditions. Overall, Canada seems like a relatively low-risk option for Kathmandu. Canada is similar to New Zealand in many aspects such as culture, law, economy and technology. However, Canada being such a large country compared to New Zealand, it should be remembered that there will be cultural differences and the strengths mentioned are mostly relevant to highly populated areas